The jury has already been selected in Karen Reed's second trial. We're going to talk about that, plus going to update you on the Menendez Brothers and Lori Vallow. All of that in today's episode of Charlie Crime Buster. It's what some people are calling the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. All individuals described or mentioned in this presentation should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Charlie Crime Buster. Glad to have you on the Charlie train today. Boy, what a busy week we have just completed. 3 national trials going on at all the same time. Of course, the Karen Reed story that we've been covering for you. The jury has been selected. But then, Lori Vallow, she's representing herself in her own trial. And on top of that, we have news from the Menendez Brothers re-sentencing trial. All of that in 1 week. We'll get you caught up for sure. But first, let me take a moment to invite you to reach out with a shout-out. We'd love to hear from those who are part of the Charlie Crime Train. If you're a new listener, hey, reach out with that shout-out. You reach me at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. If you're a seasoned listener, then you reach out as well. Sometimes people will have questions about what we're covering. Often we'll get suggestions on other cases to cover. And then sometimes people will lodge objections, in other words, disagree with what we say. We always say that's fine because it is a safe place here for you to disagree. Whichever way, we'd love to hear from you, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. And by the way, why don't you check out our sponsor? That's peacemakernetwork.com. There you can find all about those wonderful, brave people who protect us. Law enforcement, first responders, boy, we really need those. And, of course, the brave men and women of the military. That's at peacemakernetwork.com. If you'd like to get caught up, James Buckland calls it binge-casting, not podcasting, binge-casting. If you'd like to get caught up on a lot of other stuff, then just go on over to charliecrimebuster.com. We have our episodes right there that you can dive into. We've covered it all, it seems like, from the Golden State Killer all the way to today's news about Karen Reed. You can find it all right there at charliecrimebuster.com. Over 200 episodes for you to binge cast with. All right, we got a little house cleaning out of the way. Now it's time for us to talk about, well, before we get into the Karen Reed story, let's talk a little more about what happened this week. Boy, what a week it was. I think one of the most surprising things coming up was the Menendez brothers. We did predict that probably they would not be granted the re-sentencing trial, but I missed that one. They have been granted it. But there's a little bit of glitch that came up on Thursday. You see, it was a hearing that could give Eric and Lyle Menendez, well, their first chance at freedom. That's in more than 30 days. But there was a little problem because there was a lot of disagreement about the Los Angeles court's access to quote, unquote, a comprehensive risk assessment. By the way, that assessment was conducted by a parole board. So this hearing, it took place, and the defense and the prosecution, well, they really got into it over whether the court should consider that risk assessment. You see, that risk assessment would determine if the brothers are eligible for a lesser sentence or maybe a path to parole. Now, there was a report. Actually, they did a report on each of them. Not together, but each of them. And that's been recently conducted by forensic psychologists. And that was a part of the parole board's clemency investigation. By the way, that investigation, well, the governor, Gavin Newsom, had requested it. Now, remember, they're actually looking for 3 things. They've been trying to get the Menendez brothers situation changed in three ways, the defense has. First of all, they've been trying to get this resentencing hearing, which they've been able to do, it looks like. The second thing they've tried to do is get clemency from Governor Gavin Newsom. And the third one, they're saying they have new evidence because someone else has come forward and said that they were abused as a young teenager by the Menendez father. So they are saying that that's new evidence. So they're trying to get a new trial. But the interesting thing was the former district attorney was the one who had recommended the resentencing. But the former district attorney, well, he was voted out. And there's a new sheriff in town. And that new sheriff, well, he said, no, I don't think we ought to do this. And he is now holding up the court to try to get the court to consider this new risk assessment. So here we're finding that it's a really, really shoot-'em-up trial as far as the attorneys are concerned, arguing about this. What will the judge say? Well, it's really, really important to see what the judge will say. Now, I don't know what is in that risk assessment, but it appears to me that probably it's not good news for the Menendez brothers. But anyway, that's where we are with them, and coming up in a few days from now, a couple weeks from now, this will pick up and we'll see exactly what happens in that area. Now again, before we get into the Karen Reed trial, there's another national trial that we've heard about this week, and that's Lori Vallow. I guess Lori Vallow-Daybell. And the interesting thing about that trial is she has actually been, get this, serving as her own attorney. Yep, her own attorney. And yet we find now that the state has already rested their case, and it looks like Lori Vallow's going to go ahead and rest her case. Resting her case without providing evidence or witnesses. Now, the prosecutors this past Wednesday rested their case against Vallow-Daybell. She, of course, is on trial in connection with the July 2019 death of her fourth husband, number 4, Charles Vallow. He was fatally shot by her brother, Alex Cox. Now, Daybell is actually accused of conspiring with her brother to kill Charles Vallow at her home in Chandler, Arizona. Now, she has pleaded not guilty, and she's arguing that that shooting was in self-defense following a family argument that escalated. Prosecutors, though, they got another story about it. They're saying what they're bringing to the court proves that Vallow-Daybell and her brother, well, that they wanted the 62-year-old dead. That's Charles Vallow. And remember, there was a little something that they thought that they were getting, that Lori thought that she was getting, and that's that $1 million life insurance. However, she was shocked to find out that prior to him being shot and killed by her brother Alex Cox, he had changed the beneficiary. Surprise, surprise, surprise. So, now, a lot of people are speculating that Lori will not just step back next week when the trial continues, but rather that she will take the stand herself and she will testify herself about what happened. Some people think she just likes the limelight so much that she will not let that pass. And yet, the indicators are that she's just going to rest the case. What will happen? We'll have to stay tuned, won't we? Because we will find some news next week as the Lori Vallow case continues. All right, now let's talk about what we've been reporting on, and that's Karen Reed's trial. We're going to tell you all about that in a moment, but right now it's time to take a break and to share with you Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Our Crazy Crook story today comes from Beaver Creek, Ohio. Now, I guess you can imagine if you're getting ready to stick up a bank, it would probably be a time of anxiety. You would probably think of all the things that could go wrong. You'd probably think about the fact that you could end up in prison. Probably a lot of that would put a lot of stress on you, don't you think? Well, this cool, calm robber went into a bank in Beaver Creek, Ohio, and he thought he had it all down except right in the middle of his heist. He became so nervous, he fainted. That's right, the old guy fainted. Right there on the floor, cold out. And so, of course, the bank teller calls for an ambulance, and as the ambulance is on the way, the guy comes to. He's laying on the floor, but you got to hand it to him. He sure wanted to try to get the job done, because while the ambulance was on the way, he handed a note to the teller that demanded all her cash. Well, because this thief got so nervous that he fainted and passed out, he was nabbed by the popo. So, my friend, our Crazy Crook story today features a robber in Beaver Creek, Ohio, who got so nervous about pulling off the heist, he fainted in the middle of it. That indeed is Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. One thing for sure, we never run out of those Crazy Crook stories, do we? All right, now let's talk about the Karen Reed trial. We've already had a jury selected now. The jury reached 18 people on Tuesday. That jury consists of 9 women and 9 men. That's 12 people who are going to decide Reed's fate in this high-profile second trial. You recall the first trial ended with a mistrial due to a starkly divided so-called hung jury. So once that jury was finalized on Tuesday, then the judge gave the attorneys from both sides option to hold opening statements on Friday. In other words, they could have started this trial on Friday or either after the holiday weekend. Well, both sides, they agreed to start the trial on Tuesday of this week, April 22nd. The courts are actually closed on Monday for what is called Patriots' Day there in Boston. Now, Reed, of course, is accused of hitting and killing John O'Keefe, that's her police officer boyfriend, that she hit him with her SUV and left him to die in the cold outside of a Canton home. That was back in 2022. But the defense are saying, no, that she's a victim of a cover-up, and she's been framed by law enforcement and several other people. So, what happened after that jury was seated this past week? Well, one of the things that came up was about Turtle Boy. Remember Turtle Boy? He is that blogger, that guy who really riled up the people up there and really got a whole group of people to support Karen Reed. He basically initiated and started the Free Karen Reed movement up there that became such an important part of the trial. The prosecution said he even got to the point that he was intimidating witnesses, and there have been charges against Turtle Boy for intimidating witnesses. He actually was charged. He was out on bail. Then he had some kind of altercation with his girlfriend where he shoved her, pushed her to try to get her phone, and so that revoked his bail, and he ended up in jail for several weeks. But don't worry about Turtle Boy, because if anything, it made him more famous, got him more followers, so he's not hurting all that much. Well, the prosecutors, they want to use communications between Turtle Boy and Karen Reed. They say that those texts between them, those communications between them, would show her consciousness of guilt. Now, Turtle Boy was included on the prosecution witness list, so he was ordered, of course, to be sequestered. That means he couldn't be a part of the trial during the trial. Now, he had previously asked the judge to be exempt from that so he could cover the trial as a member of the press. So the judge this past week asked Brennan if he planned to call Turtle Boy as a part of his case in chief. Brennan, the attorney, said, well, he didn't know, but it would depend on developments in the trial. But here's the kicker. They said that if Turtle Boy was called, he intended to exercise his Fifth Amendment right. Remember, he's got these charges about witness intimidation. So then they said, well, if he's going to plead the fifth, there's no reason to call him as a witness. They actually wanted to hear Turtle Boy say it himself. So they said, if they brought Turtle Boy into the courtroom, and Turtle Boy basically said he's going to plead the fifth. So as a result of all that, it appears that Turtle Boy will not be able to will not be able to testify because he had pled the fifth. So there was a whole lot of give and take over this idea of Turtle Boy testifying. Now there's another important thing that they covered in the trial this week, and that's about the Archi witnesses. This is the expert crash reconstruction witnesses who actually came and testified during Karen Reed's first trial. And that was Daniel Wolf and Andrew Risher. Now, both of those were hired by the federal government. There's another strange thing about this trial, because of all the commotion and all of the accusations about a police cover-up, the federal government decided to investigate the trial. Not investigate Karen Reed, but investigate the trial. And so Arca, these witnesses were hired by the federal government as part of how that case was handled. By the way, that investigation has now closed. But here's the kicker. The Archi witnesses testified that O'Keefe's injuries in that first trial were not NOT, not consistent with being hit by a car. But there's another problem. All through that first trial, Karen Reed's attorneys basically said that Wolf and Renshire were independent witnesses. In other words, they were not biased, which would basically give them a lot more credibility to what they were saying. The defense attorneys actually had portrayed them as a neutral witness, said they had little contact with them. But after the trial, Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan, I told you, man, this guy, he's coming, he's ready to hunt bear. I mean, the prosecutor is a much more assertive, a much more aggressive prosecutor than the previous prosecutor. That's one thing that's going to be different about this trial. Hank Brennan, he found out that the court had obtained a bill from Arca to the defense for nearly $24,000. Brennan added that in the March hearing that there were emails between Reed's team and these Archi experts, with Wolf writing in one email, Daniel Wolf said, "If you don't want me to say this, that's fine." Wow. So, of course, this really got the Judge Cannon, that riled her up. She scolded Jackson and the defense team at that time, but she did deny the prosecution's request to exclude the Archi witnesses. So they are going to be called as witnesses, and we know what they're going to say. They're going to say again that the injuries on John O'Keefe was not consistent to being hit by a car. So you can see how Brennan wanted to do everything he possibly could to get these witnesses eliminated from the witness list. He wanted to get their testimony thrown out of court. If they had, that would have been a biggie. But right now it appears that the Archi witnesses can testify, but they cannot be presented to the jury as non-biased people. In other words, they're going to be linked to the defense this time as it goes about. Now, so Brennan comes back. I told you he's aggressive. He then wanted to make sure they were confined to their initial report from the first trial. And so that was a lot of arguing back and forth during that time. Now, something else on these motions that's very important. There was also a motion to exclude the testimony about the dog. Remember, there was a big German Shepherd there in the house there. where the defense alleged, John O'Keefe went into that house, was beaten up, brought out into the snow to die. And the defense is saying that the wounds on John O'Keefe's arm is much more consistent from being bit by a dog. So Brennan now, he wants to knock this one out. He filed a motion during Wednesday in an effort to exclude the testimony from Garrett Wing. That was the one who testified in the first trial about those injuries to O'Keefe's arm. Now, Wing is expected to testify that the wounds on his arm were consistent from injuries from a dog bite. So Brennan, he comes back and he's arguing that Wing has no experience, no training, doesn't believe he's ever testified in court. And Brennan asked for a hearing that would allow the attorneys to question Wing without the jurors present. Now, one of Reed's attorneys, by the way, they called Wing one of, if not the country's leading expert in training law enforcement and handling K-9s. So he says that Wing has extensive experience with wound recognition. So this was a motion that came up, but unfortunately the judge did not rule on it. I imagine, from the way the judge has been ruling, that they will allow the testimony from Wing that will say, in his opinion, that the wounds on John O'Keefe's arm was consistent with a dog bite. So, we're getting geared up for a humdinger of a trial. Now, remember, she's facing second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under the influence of alcohol, and she's charged with leaving the scene of personal injury and death. And, of course, Reed has said not guilty to all that. Now, the last thing that we really saw about what happened this last week was Karen Reed has been much more talkative to the press on this round than before. She's already had interviews. She's already had a Netflix special. So she's talking a lot. And so as she comes out of the trial, the reporters are surrounding her. She says, I feel a little tired, but I'm strong. She says, I feel stronger every day. And I do remember seeing her in one of these newscasts as they were asking her. They said, the prosecutors said in another filing that they wanted to use Reed's own words against her at trial. This was something that they had previously hinted about. And remember, they wanted to do that starting with the opening statements. They're saying that what she's saying is showing a consciousness of guilt. And so they're planning to play Reed's various media interviews that she's conducted in these past months. But Karen Reed said this. She basically said, bring it on. Let them come. She's ready for them. So you can see it's almost like a, championship boxing match, isn't it? I mean, a lot of press. Everybody's really excited about this trial. So you might ask me, what do I think might be different in this trial? Well, as I've said before, one of the first things is that they're going to be a much more formidable opponent for the defense. Brennan is, I think, you keep in mind, he has been a very successful defense attorney, so he knows exactly what the defense is going to be shooting for. So he's going to be a much stronger foe, if you might say that. He's going to be much stronger in presenting the state's case. He's going to be much more aggressive. I think he's going to resonate a whole lot more with the jury. Now, we know that Jackson, he resonates with the jury. We know that our other attorney, Yannetti, he resonated with the jury. He really communicated well with the jurors. I believe Brennan will be that kind of prosecutor as well. The next thing I think we're going to see is I think Brennan's going to bring a better expert when it comes to reconstructing that accident. In fact, I'm going to tell you folks, he better be a better expert because ARCA, they are very, very strong and very, very good in front of a jury. And added to that during the last trial, there was the weight that the Archive had been hired by the federal government, not hired by the defense attorney. So what about this thing that the defense ended up paying them around $25,000? That really didn't surprise me, because in my mind, if I'm a defense attorney and I hear these independent witnesses come in and they have good material, I'm going to try to get my hands on it. Wouldn't you, if you were that defense attorney? So if they get their hands on that material, guess what? You're going to have to pay for it, right? You're going to have to pay for it. So I think that could be explained away pretty easily. That, hey, we want that material. We want to study that material. We want to be ready to stand, to stand and defend that material. So, of course, they were going to have to pay the Archive company some money to get that material. So it doesn't appear to me that there was a lot of wrongdoing by the defense on this, because I think that this was an independent, it began as an independent inquiry, and they were hired by the federal government, not by the defense. But the defense had to pay some money to get their hands on the material. So, but here's the thing. They're very strong. They testify very strongly. And they're very adamant that those injuries in their mind is not consistent with being hit by a vehicle. But I bet you Brennan brings on a top-notch accident reconstruction expert who will say the direct opposite. So it's going to get back down to this thing, a battle of the experts. Now, here's what Brennan's going to have to overcome. The coroner said that while he died with blunt force injury to the back of his head and hypothermia, the cause of that, the manner of that, was undetermined. So it wasn't a homicide, as most homicides are. So Brandon's going to have to get over that. He's going to have to get over the fact that there's going to be an expert, unless the judge rules otherwise, is going to say that the wounds on his arms was consistent with a dog bite. He's going to have to get over the fact that the Archive witnesses, these experts on accident reconstruction, are going to say that the wounds and the injuries on John O'Keefe was not consistent by being hit by a car. So that's going to be some pretty strong stuff. That's not even counting the texts, where there, of course, is disagreement on what time that text was issued. So I guess what I'm saying, that I think the prosecution is going to be a lot stronger, and I think there's a possibility they might get a guilty plea. That's on one hand. On the other hand, there's a whole lot of room for reasonable doubt. All right, folks, get ready. Get ready to board the Charlie crime train this next week, because this trial is just getting ready to get started. By the way, if you'd like to get caught up, go to charliecrimebuster.com, charliecrimebuster.com. You're going to find a whole group of podcasts there that you can binge cast, as James Buckland says. Don't forget to join us this week on our YouTube channel. We're going to talk about this particular podcast that we just dropped. So that's what happened last week. Now let's get geared for this week. It's going to start on Tuesday. Charlie Crime Buster, we're going to be right on top of it. We're going to keep you in the loop on what's happening with the Karen Reed trial. So, my friend, until this time next time, this is Charlie Crime Buster reminding you, be safe, be alert. For the life you save, it may be your very.
You have been listening to Charlie Crime Buster. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Peacemaker Network, and also encourage you to support the first responders, military, and law enforcement personnel by contributing to the Peacemaker Network. That's peacemakernetwork.com. peacemakernetwork.com. You can also support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, tag @CharlieCrimeBuster. And once you arrive there, click the subscribe button. By doing so, you'll be notified each time we drop one of our shows. Another more convenient way for you to listen to our podcasts are for you to say to your smart speaker, play Charlie Crime Buster. If you have comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you. So please send them to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you may call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.